Welcome to In Conversation with writer and editor Sheila Bender, discussions on writing and the writing life, a monthly chat with writers, publishers, and those who support the literary arts. Today, Sheila is talking with Boston author and novelist David Reich about his work in progress, Executor, My Years in Probate, a how-to book and memoir about love and learning in settling a friend's estate.
Hello, this is Sheila Bender, and you are listening to In Conversation with Sheila Bender, discussions on writing and the writing life. Today, we're talking with David Reich, who's speaking to us from Quincy, Massachusetts. He is a writer who's been at work since the 70s, writing literary fiction and nonfiction. His work has appeared in journals such as the North American Review, Transatlantic Review, and The Smith. He started publishing when he was a student at the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville, where he was earning an MFA. His novel, The Anti-Racism Trainings, was published in 2010. David regularly writes magazine articles on topics including politics, law enforcement, science, economics, and the arts. He has often reported from Latin America and once interviewed a U.S. Defense Secretary in his office in the Pentagon. David, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you, Sheila.
I'm so glad you're here today, and I know that what I'm interested in talking to you about is something that doesn't yet appear in your bio, and that is a recently finished book, a memoir called Executor, My Years in Probate. I know the project was taken on because a very dear friend of yours had asked you to become an executor for her when she knew that she might die at an early age, and you as a good friend took her up on that request. And it took you years both to be her executor and to write the book. And your belief, as I've heard you tell me, is that this is a book that will be useful to many people of our generation, the baby boomers, who are taking on the role of executor, that you took it on without a background in how to do this and had to learn as you went. And so you've woven together a beautiful memoir with memories of Roberta, memories of how you and your wife handled the situation of a dying friend, and how you handled becoming her executor and ultimately winning a large amount of money for the environmental cause that was dear to her heart. That said, before we begin talking about the book and your motivation for writing it and hearing some passages, is there anything you'd like to tell us before you read from the book a little bit?
I wanted to correct one thing that you said, which is that she asked me to be her executor well before she became sick. And I took the job on not thinking that I was going to have to do it. So I was kind of gobsmacked when it actually came time for me to carry out these duties, which I didn't have any real clue about. That's what this passage talks about.
Thank you. When I read it, and I know that you said when she still had her health, I guess in my mind I had filled in that she was in the early stages of her illness. But this was before any diagnosis or anything. Wow. So you were being a good friend without ever thinking that you would have to come through on this favor.
Yeah. I didn't take it on because I didn't think I'd have to do it, but the idea of having to actually do these things, whatever they might consist of, and I didn't have a clear idea of what they were, was pretty theoretical at the point.
Right. Well, thank you for that clarification, and I think then this would be a good place for you to start with a passage from the book that kind of lays out the situation as it happened when you did know that you were going to have to be her executor.
Sure. Roberta had named me her executor the first time she made out a will some 10 years earlier. That is, some 10 years before her final illness. By then, she had paid off the mortgage on her house, and she'd put aside a bit of retirement money, about as much as you'd expect for an unmarried, childless woman of Roberta's age, with a mid-five-figure income, frugal habits, and an extraordinary head for numbers. Why did she pick me? It might well have had to do with my career, such as it was. As a freelance writer for a rapidly shrinking roster of clients, I had an unusually flexible schedule. Another way of saying I had time on my hands, and thus could carry out, with little disruption to my routines, an executor's responsibilities. I had at best a vague idea of what these might consist of, nor did I think I'd be finding out more very soon. Roberta, after all, enjoyed excellent health, exercised daily, ate organic foods, and avoided all those nasty habits that could ticket you for an early death. she could easily outlive me, possibly by many years. There came a time, of course, when I realized she might not outlive me at all. Then I started reading how-to books on being an executor. Questions came up that I should have been asking myself years before. Did I really have the patience, for example, to do complicated detail work, often starting without complete information? Could I calmly handle brush-offs and unreasonable demands from banks and government bureaus? Did I like to sit around on hold listening to music while waiting for the next available representative? And how much equanimity would I bring to the prospect of being sued for an innocent mistake or a lapse of judgment? Whatever my misgivings when Roberta called up and offered to find someone else for the job, I rejected the offer out of hand. This happened a few months before she died, a time when her lawyer, soon to be my lawyer, was helping her fine-tune her will. If you want someone else, great, I won't be offended. But if you still want me to do it, I still want to, I said. I had my faults, God knew. They were plenteous and varied, but it was part of my self-image that I always kept commitments, period. More important, being executor was something I could actually do for Roberta, a substitute, though a paltry one, for keeping her alive.
Thank you, David. What a serious subject and time in your life with Roberta. I know you go on in the book to talk about how much you wanted her to believe she could still fight the illness and survive. So that line really strikes me, that it was a substitute, though a paltry one, for keeping her alive. Did you in any way think you would be writing about this?
No. I mean, certainly not at the outset, but as things became difficult and complicated, then I started to see that this was going to be a writing project.
Did that help you through this, to know that you were also writing about it?
Good question. I don't remember. Probably not.
Okay, but I'm going to tell you, as the reader of the book, the writing remembers. I mean, it must have been a way to keep yourself together, I think, about all of this. Mm-hmm. I know that at some point you realized that this was going to be not only a memoir, but a book that could help other people who find themselves in this role of executor. And so you've created something of a hybrid book, I guess. Do you have a name for the genre that you're writing in?
It was originally much more of a hybrid. There was more how-to in it. And I've moved, partly because there are a lot of how-to books on the market by people with a much broader overview of being an executor than I have. I moved away from that more towards a memoir and kind of an emotional diary of what it's like to be an executor of someone's will, where the estate offers a bunch of complications, as this one did.
So, I mean, as many memoirs are for a general audience, even though they're about specific parts of lives that inform us about things we might not know about, and I can see that in your book. Do you also think it may have a specialized audience among?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Who would that be?
Yeah, the specialized audience would be anyone who expects to find him or herself in the role of executor, and that's an awful lot of people, particularly in my generation. I'm 65, and as you get older, more and more people are going to need that service. So,
do you think that maybe people who are training to help people who are in that role, perhaps law students or health professionals, are there people like that who might benefit?
Particularly law students, and I've talking to a law professor about this very topic. She thought that it would be useful for law students to read a book that presents the probate process from the point of view of the executor.
And speaking of that, I'm remembering passages in your book where you are going to be meeting with the lawyer who you just read to us was Roberta's lawyer and soon to be your lawyer, and you have some pre-questions, and then you meet him, and what comes out of that meeting is making my head spin in terms of how much more you realized there was in store for you. So I'm wondering if maybe you could read the passage that has the questions you had thought of ahead of time before you met the lawyer called Fred King.
Okay.
Thanks.
Here are the questions. Should I call house insurance company to obtain payment schedule and arrange future payments? Should I call state pension fund or whoever pays the pension? What should I do about transferring car to Cynthia C., and when should I do it? Is it okay to leave it in Ken's driveway for now? How to get rugged to NYC, and do I need to do anything before I send? When can I give away low-value items, photos, old furniture, camera, etc., some of which Roberta designated for friends and some not? What should I do, if anything, regarding retirement and annuity accounts with beneficiaries named? What should I do about collecting additional deposit from Miles? Miles is one of Roberta's tenants. Should a state collect apartment rents? If so, whom should checks be written to, and what should I do with them when they come? What should I do about the joint Jack Goldman, Roberta Goldman dividend check? Will I need to appear in court? If so, for what purpose and roughly when? What are the mechanics of setting up an estate account? What fee should I charge, and when should I charge it? Can I use Roberta's leftover cash, approximately $90, for small estate expenses? That's the end of that list.
Right. Well, that's quite a list. But then you meet with Fred King, and there's a whole bunch more that happens. And might you read some of that for us?
Yeah, and I'm going to read some of it, but not all. It could take up the rest of your show pretty nearly.
Right, but the contrast, I mean, those questions you were asking yourself were huge.
Right.
A lot to have on a to-do list, and then you find out even more. So read as much as you'd like.
And I'll preface this by saying I'm going to read the first part of this passage. It's the longest single paragraph I ever have written. It's a 4-page paragraph that contains the onslaught of information that Fred threw at me, and I wrote it in a single paragraph to sort of reflect that.
It certainly does.
It's just so much, and all coming at me very fast, all at once. And even though I had read these how-to books and had probably a better background than most people coming into this role have, I just couldn't get it all under control. So I spent the first 15 minutes of my time with Fred signing triplicate copies of 3 documents, all incomprehensible. After that, Fred leaned back in his massive chair, folded his long legs, and began to sketch a rough map of the coming year. The next day or so, I'd apply to be appointed executor. Fred would file the documents with the probate court clerk. No court appearance necessary. Notify in writing Roberta's heir-at-law and the legatees and devisees, that is, Roberta's father and the people and/or institutions named in the will to get money or goods. Run a legal announcement in the local weekly, and with luck. In other words, if no one challenged the will or wanted me replaced as executor, which seemed like a safe bet for this estate, though of course you never knew, the court would issue my appointment papers in maybe 8 or 9 weeks. Meanwhile, the 2 most important things were, 1, take the plates off Roberta's car and turn them into the registry, and in the meantime make sure no one drives the thing, and 2, verify that the house is insured and the insurance paid up. If the house burns down and it's uninsured, it's on you, my friend, Fred said cheerily. Same thing if somebody cracks up the car and, God forbid, injures someone. Beyond the car and the fire insurance, sometime in the next 6 months, I would have to file an inventory with the court, an itemized accounting of Roberta's possessions and financial assets. And sometime in the next 9 months, I would have to file the estate taxes, and it goes on several pages more from here. And I'm going to go to the very end of the passage, which is the following paragraph, my reaction to all of this stuff. All this was just a sample, if you can believe it, of the information Fred conveyed. I took notes, but fell farther and farther behind. Despite my preparation, my dutiful reading of the how-to books, the onslaught of detail left me short of breath and slightly dizzy, as if I'd just stepped off a carnival ride. Only 5 days had passed since Roberta died, and my one thought had been to forge ahead with her estate. I didn't want to think about Roberta right now, and the estate gave me something else to think about. But I was starting to see that the something else quickly led back to Roberta. her kitchenware, her clothing, her finances, her car, her real estate, her books, her correspondence, her medical records, her little secrets, the few pictures she hadn't yanked off her walls and given away. I would have charge of all of it.
Wow, David, your writing is so beautiful and lyrical. I'm sad that it's about the loss of a friend, and I'm inspired by the beauty with which, just in that list, you resurrect her life. And, of course, describe your own in this event of being the executor. So your book, although it's a memoir, is just like fiction, peopled with characters and settings and quandaries and conflicts. I'm wondering now, you said it took some time to write this book. How soon during this process of being the executor did you start writing it?
I think maybe about a year in. I do know that I had already gone through a couple of drafts before I got the settlement in the malpractice suit, which was around 4 years after she died. Probably a year in, and it's gone through a lot of drafts. The basic contents have remained the same. It's more succeeding drafts. What's changed is more tone and diction and so on.
You are listening to KPTZ 91.9 Port Townsend. In case you've just joined us, our program is In Conversation with Sheila Bender, discussions on writing and the writing life.
How are you sensitive to the tone and to the changes for your final draft?
I'm sort of, I hope, near the end of the latest draft, and this one I've done after not having looked at the manuscript for maybe a year or probably more. One thing that started me thinking about it again was the fact that I've had to become an executor once more because my father died recently, and it just sort of sent me back to this project. And I'm working with some of the same people again, including the same lawyer. What I found after not having looked at it for a year or two is that I wasn't always crazy about the tone. There were places where the ironies were a little too easy, places where the diction was a little too high, and I wanted to bring it down so as not to create too much distance with the reader. And that's a kind of revision that's very labor-intensive. You go over word by word, sentence by sentence, and I've gone through the manuscript probably about 5 or 6 times just in this current iteration, and every time I find some things that catch the previous time.
I want to, first of all, offer you my condolences on the loss of your father.
Oh, thanks.
And second of all, say that in dealing with the tone, it dawns on me that sometimes that kind of misdirected tone is a protective device that we have as people, certainly as writers, and that by needing to listen to that and revise it for the reader, you must be getting awfully close to your feelings. When you read the opening about Roberta and her giving you this task of being executor, and when you wrote about leaving Fred King's office and how you felt, I'm hearing the human heart, and I just want to say that I think you've succeeded very well in making this reader feel very close to your material.
Oh, thank you.
So where are you with the possible publication of this project?
Essentially nowhere. I do have some plans to, once this draft is completed, to resume looking for someone to publish it. I did have one offer, but just the details of it weren't to my liking, so I decided to pass. And I guess I'm glad I did for literary reasons, because as I have looked at it recently, clearly had some more work.
That's really interesting.
Needed to be done.
Yeah, I know in the production process from my own experience that you can have a manuscript accepted and a foresighted acquisition editor will see that it's worthy even though it needs another drafting or two. On the other hand, I had an agent for a while who always said to me, things happen in the right time. And she was always right. Books that I thought were taking a really long time to get out there finally did, and they were much better books. So I really commend you on your patience, something that a lot of us don't have, especially in this day and age. I know that you've had a publishing process to go through with your novel, the anti-racism trainings, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about that, and if there's anything from that experience that you're bringing forward into the experience of this next book to publish.
I don't know. The publishing process for the anti-racism trainings is that I found an agent to represent it, and she sent it to editors that she knew at various big commercial publishers.
So do you think that you would agent this next book?
Maybe not. The anti-racism trainings, eventually the agent, although she got some favorable responses from the editors, they were in the nature of this is a pretty interesting book, but doesn't seem like something that we could publish successfully. Why doesn't your author look into a small press? And that's what I ended up doing.
I see. So maybe for our listeners, we could talk about the subject of the anti-racism training, so they'll know what that book is about.
See, I don't like the term political correctness because it gets misused by people on the right wing, but that's essentially what it's about. It's political correctness viewed from a left-wing perspective, and in particular in connection with race and sort of I think there's kind of a profession that's been built up around peddling racial guilt to liberal, well-meaning liberal white people who kind of find that sort of thing attractive.
I see. I would say that you're writing in some really interesting niches, David. I know that book too, and I know that it's good reading. And again, you've developed your characters and worked with tone and plot. I think you're a very skilled writer, and I really admire your bringing that skill to this project about your friend Roberta and your jobs as her executor. So before we close, I'm hoping that you might read to us from the very ending of the book. And again, how many years did it take before the settlement was won and you were finished being executor?
It was a little under 4 years. It took me 1 year to find a malpractice lawyer to represent this legal claim, and that's because Roberta was unmarried and childless, and most lawyers felt that the case wouldn't be sufficiently lucrative for them to bring it to court. Malpractice lawyers are generally paid a percentage of the judgment or the settlement, and so a small judgment or a small settlement, and by small I mean $200,000, was not very attractive to these guys. But I did finally find a law firm to take it, and as it turned out, they were one of the best and most feared malpractice firms in the Boston area. So they were the 10th firm that I contacted, actually.
And before you read the passage that ends the book, can you tell us about the settlement, what it was for, and the success of it?
Malpractice action was about a problem in the diagnosis of Roberta's cancer. She had visited her gynecologist with certain complaints, and the gynecologist ordered a biopsy, and the biopsy was performed incorrectly, and therefore the pathologist couldn't reach any conclusions about whether there was any disease. It was the doctor's responsibility, the gynecologist's responsibility, that is, then to reorder the biopsy, to order a repeat biopsy so that they could reach some conclusions about what was going on. And he just let that slip, and Roberta was probably a little bit in denial, didn't push him on it either, and it took another 2 years, including a bunch of repeat visits to various doctors, before the biopsy got done again. And at that point, she had a cancer that was far more advanced than the one that would have been found if the biopsy had been performed.
So this idea of the malpractice suit was something that she had instituted?
Yes. Surprisingly, her oncologist, who works for the same health maintenance organization that the gynecologist worked for, and presumably they must have known each other, suggested to her, she said, you really ought to sue this guy. He really didn't serve you well. And the first of those 10 law firms was given a chance to take the case, was a law firm that Roberta went to herself when she was still alive. But she died before they gave her any decision.
So she had a definite idea of what she would do with that money should she win the lawsuit?
Well, the way her will was written, according to the way her will was written, that is, most of the money from the lawsuit was going to go to this environmental group, which I call in the book the Global Warming Fighters. It's actually a pretty well-known national environmental group that she used to donate money to when she was alive. She was a very charitable person and also very concerned about the environment.
So winning that lawsuit was a climax in your narrative, I think?
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
And so we only have another minute. I would really love to hear the ending, if you could read the passage of the ending of the book where we have a sense of how it felt to finish your work as executor.
Sure. This scene begins with the writer having pretty much wrapped up most of the stuff in the estate. The narrator, I meant, that is me, having pretty much wrapped up the estate, is going over some of Roberta's old tax returns and other records and kind of shredding them and disposing of them and so on. The passage begins, as I worked at this, it struck me that Roberta was gone now, really gone, as if she hadn't been gone for almost 4 years already. The idea, however foolish and sentimental, started gnawing at me in a physical way, just below the solar plexus. Then, after a while, my allergies kicked in, most likely a reaction to the dust and mold spores I kicked up when I opened the ancient files, and I began to cough and wheeze. Feeling restless and hoping to clear my lungs, I put on my running clothes and headed at a moderate clip for the beach. Over the water, the stars were as bright as they ever got in our urban corner of the world, and the moon reflecting off the waves made one of those corny postcard views. As I ran along the shore, in my sappy frame of mind, I inevitably tried to contact Roberta. My inner voice called out, "I did what you wanted, Roberta, okay? I got Jack $500,000. I got global warming more than that, on top of the $400,000 you left them to begin with. They're going to name a program for you." Silence. Still, I kept up the mental jabber. The college set up a math scholarship, and they call it the Roberta Sue Goldman Award. They put up a bench on campus in your memory, and there's a big hunk of granite sitting next to it with your name and dates on a brass nameplate, along with the words, "Revered colleague." Is it okay, Roberta? Are we okay now? Did I do it the way you wanted me to? At the end of the beach, I saw the CVS drugstore, a blaze of light on the far side of Quincy Shore Drive. I turned in the sand and headed for home. I said, "I'll never forget you, I swear to God, but can I move on from being your executor now?" Again, no answer came, but later that night, tucked in next to Martha, I did get an answer of a sort. I dreamed I was driving Roberta's car, having guided it safely over a long, majestic bridge, Roberta serene in the co-pilot seat.
David, I have tears having heard you read that, and I have a sense that maybe you have tears as well.
Yeah, I think this is one passage in my writing where I managed to have fooled myself a little bit, and every time it seems when I get to that part of the book, I do have an emotional reaction to it.
It's such a beautiful testimony to your work, to your friendship, and it's such a human plea, and I can't tell you how grateful as a reader I am that you had that dream and that she was there in the car over the majestic bridge. So I want to thank you very much for your time today talking with us, and I wish you great luck in finding a home for this book, which I think so many people will be interested to read.
Thanks very much, Sheila. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you, David. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
In Conversation is produced by Sheila Bender and edited by Charlie Fleischman. Production coordinator is Mike Schlexer. Announcer is Kurt Vanderslice.